Upon returning home, they would have their tea, listening in of course, and then retire to the sitting room with the family, huddle around the radio and settle in for a night of easy listening, like the families of the 30s, 40s and 50s. Unfortunately for them, this was the 1960s, and this was Stoke-on-Trent, and the people of the city didn't want to stay in. They wanted to go out and play.
Just what is it that you want to do?
Well, we want to be free. We want to be free to do what we want to do. And we want to get loaded. And we want to have a good time. And that's what we're going to do.
Well, when, baby? Let's go.
We're going to have a good time. We're going to have a party.
OK, it wasn't quite like that. But the Potteries people have always known how to enjoy themselves. And those early lineups of Adventures in Learning, At Your Service, Outline, Midday Scene or Pits and Pots were just the ticket for some, but they couldn't really compete for others with, over the years, and this is a tiny list, Maxime's, Luma Road, The Torch, the New Vic Theatre, The Rigger, Shelley, Sammy Bell's, The Albion, Grab a Granny at the Queen's Basford, The Sud, The Gaumont, The ABC, The Place, The Limelight, The Ancient Britain, The Cockloft, The Vicky Hall, The Comrades Club, Charlie Brown's, Trentham Gardens, The Commercial, The Beehive, The Sagamakers, Jollies, The Cherry Tree, Boxing at the North Stafford, and, of course, Sensations. In 1968, this was a city of potters, miners and steelworkers, but it was also a city of singers, dancers, sports people and, of course, drinkers. Ah, the after-work drink, an essential for some as the air they breathed. In fact, often essential because of the air that they breathed. Arthur Berry, as always, gets it in one.
I just have to have a steady 6 pints every night. Just a steady 6, no more and no less. I've always been the same for years and years. A steady 6 pints every night as God ever sends. It sends me sleep like a babby. It's better than all the doctor's medicine in the world. I've always been the same since I was a young youth. I've gone out and had me ale, and I've gone home satisfied. As soon as my head touches that pillow, I'm gone. My hair was just the same before me. I used to manage on 3 or 4 though, but they are such bloody pasteurised these. You want a bucket full before you know you've had a drink. Still, I'll say you again. It must be getting on for 9 o'clock. Time I was having my first pint. If I start at 9, I can just manage 6 pints very nicely before closing. 6 pints, a steady 6, not a drop more. I've always been the same. We just like it now. Down the British Legion. I can't abide clubs, all them bloody kids running up and down, and the same committee men stuck year after year, all pissed in the same pot. Now, give me a pub any time. I tell you what, youth, if it's one of us a drink, and me up and old cake and a bit of cheese, they could put me in churchyard tomorrow.
You can just picture him, the solitary drinker in his favourite corner night after night. Others, of course, wanted company, and not always for polite discussion. Fred Hugh remembers.
The public houses, they used to open from 6 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock.
Great.
And beer was tuppence a pint, and there was a famous Parker's brewery, where they have a brew called F Brew, and a couple of those, and you're soon on your back. But on Saturdays, this hellhole really used to be a hellhole.
Yes.
Because they hadn't used to be able to go round there under 2 policemen. And if you wanted a bit of fun, people used to go down there and see the fun because the fights and that sort of thing. But the main point about it was that they were sort of a rough sort of lot.
I see.
And having a scrap was their cup of tea.
There was such a choice of pubs. And pubs that changed character according to the time of day. Pubs with different rooms for different types. Public bars, tap rooms, snugs, lounges with a tiny carpet and little windows for off sales. You could stick or twist, stay put or do a crawl. And if you wanted to make sure you didn't miss a pub in Hanley, there was a handy, if slightly dull, poem with most of them in.
In this tiny
little borough
surrounding Market Square, everyone was happy, everyone was doing fine. You could get a good drink in the
Albion, Monroe's,
or
the Tontine.
He went to the
Market Tavern,
then the
Sea Lion,
to search for a wren, then on to
the George and Dragon
for a good game of darts with the men. Now he fancied his chances at cribbage, so he looked for a gambling den. He discovered the
Burton Stores.
I was related to the landlord mysen. He continued his tour of Hanley in the
Bull's Head.
pub that night. He met the
Duke of Wellington.
with a lass of sheer delight. Though I could go on for many a while to let the truth unfold, these are my recollections. There's lots more still untold. Things have changed in many ways, but in my heart I hold my memories of the market square and Hanley's pubs in days of old.
In addition to the pubs, there were the clubs. I'm not talking the place here. I'm talking working men's clubs. From Pitts Hill to Busford, it was possible to join for about £1.50 a year, although you wouldn't have to pay it all up front. As long as your face fitted, of course.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I do feel that the young man for the first time singing in Club Lounge, on behalf of Newcastle members, Norman, we wish you every success in any club you go in.
Smiling, keep on smiling, the whole world. Go on, when you're loving, keep on loving.
In the 70s, Radio Stoke's John Aberley looked at the evolution of this institution.
The sounds of Clubland in North Staffordshire are more or less what you'd expect. And so the drinks. A pint for him, a Guinness perhaps for her. But in the last 20 years, or perhaps less than that, most other things have changed beyond all expectations. Not a cloth cap in sight. The working man's club of today is business. Big business. Some clubs turn over as much as £80,000 in a year, and every penny piece of profit is enjoyed by the members themselves, whether it's in the form of a new concert room extension, a holiday for the old folks, or an outing for the kiddies. Profiteering, other than for the club itself, gets nowhere in the club and institute movement. And in many cases, the clubs have been transformed by this relatively sudden wealth.
At Woolstanton Miners' Welfare Club, the members and Secretary Eric Budworth were happy to accept a new world order.
There's lots of people get in this room. I mean, they get pretty fair at what I'll term money men in. Now, you can get a labourer walk in here, he gets just the same treatment. There's no one gets preferential treatment at all. And this is what I like about it. I mean, you can rub shoulders with a man that's got bags of money. It doesn't make any difference at all. Or you can talk to the lowest of the lowest, well, labourers. It doesn't make any difference. It's really social.
You can see that people's income's raised and the type of club that they want. The type of place that they feel at home in now is totally different than it was a year or two ago. Our members now would never be satisfied with what they had 10 years ago, when they used to think that they were having a good time in a square building with hard wooden chairs. Now they want a comfortable lounge with carpet on the floor.
A bit of carpet, however, didn't change what the clubs were and what they were called.
I don't think it ought to be changed because it is the working class people that come and use it regular, don't they? No, I don't think the name ought to be changed.
Well, it is the working man that's just paid for it. With all said and done, he's in 7 years paid 60 odd thousand back in 7 years. I mean, it doesn't matter who he is, he's still a working man, isn't he?
The clubs, and to a certain extent the pubs, fulfilled a variety of functions. The after-work pint, a place to meet for a game of crib or skittles, or to discuss community. But the weekend was different. Friday, and especially Saturday, were special. Glad rags were put on, and couples went out and hit the dance floor. It was always thus.
But Mum and Dad like Saturday night. Mum and Dad like Saturday night. Saturday night is a jolly day night. Saturday night is a holiday night. Mum and Dad like Saturday night.
Naturally, one size didn't fit all, and the music your parents enjoyed was unlikely to be your music, just as your children would find your attempts to have a good time slightly ridiculous. In 1968, musical tastes were incredibly polarised, with the turn-on, tune-in, drop-out ideology alongside the last days of ballroom. Or so we thought. Strictly anybody?
Well, when you were going to take your first steps in the sophisticated ways of the adult world, you you generally tried your luck, first of all, at the Sutton Institute at Trent Vale, which was in the middle of the Sutton estate, down Fremantle Road, and you danced to records. Woodchopper's Ball was a favourite, I remember there. But there was a magical air about this place, and I used to put my brill cream on, and I never really asked anyone to dance. I was too young, actually, to dare to do that. But the people who were jitterbugging, jive in those days. I mean, the jitterbugging couples were a tremendous sight at dances, and they really were experts. They really could do it, and of course it didn't really matter that they were dancing to record. In fact, it was better that they were dancing to record because they knew the beat, and the chap was throwing the girl over his shoulder, and she was showing her pants all over the place, but it was marvellous entertainment, really, just to go along and watch the star turns.
BBC Radio Stoke's John Aberley with pre-1968 memories from the Sutton Institute, gateway to the Majestic, the Rialto, the Mecca Ballroom and the King's Hall. As John says, being in the same charged atmosphere as members of the opposite sex didn't always lead to happy ever afters. Joan Bennett remembers Trentham Gardens.
He always came and asked you to dance, and more often than not, he said, "May I have the pleasure of this dance?" In fact, I can remember one of my very odd friends who used to go to Trentham, very, very tall girl, very aristocratic-looking girl, always used to dress sort of a bit way out, and she sort of stalked into Trentham one night, and a fellow came up to her a bit offbeat and said, "Are you dancing?" And she turned to him and she says, "No, I always walk like this."
Everything, though, was changing, as it inevitably does with the tastes of the young. Mel Hill explains to Radio Stoke in 1978 what was happening in the city just before the station opened.
I think the big change in the Potteries came with the opening of the place. That was, of course, something that set out to be a nightclub, and the hours were different, the atmosphere was different. I used to play in the resident band in the place during the mid-1960s. And it was a totally different kind of work for us from anything that we'd done before. We used to have to wear funny uniforms. Sort of red club jackets, I think that they were called, which we found embarrassing, and funny shiny grey trousers.
Alongside the nightclub disco explosion with its ill-fitting suits, girls dressed as bridesmaids and velveteen furniture, the late 60s and 70s adopted a new way for the youth of the city to entertain themselves, without the need for funny, shiny grey trousers.
Out on the floor each night, I'm really moving.
The city was right at the centre of the Northern Soul movement, and it endures today. The Torch in Tunstall is spoken of in hushed tones in the Northern Soul community. King Spinners, Colin Curtis and Keith Minshall and Chris Burton talk about the early days and the evolution of the sound.
And they were good, a bit more sort of Tamla influenced, if I remember right. It wasn't what I call the hardcore northern scene. Opening night was just stunning. I think the first night the queue went round the corner, and we always refer to the chip shop as it used to be, because when the queue reached the chip shop, we always knew we were going to have a busy night. That was like the barometer, the benchmark.
Yeah, there was the contemporary music of the day. I mean, Marvin Gaye would get dropped wherever I Lay My Hat was played, and the Beach Boys do it again. Amen Corner records were played, but and mixed in with the soul. So it was predominantly a soul night, and the Friday nights really were the first time we'd seen people from outside of Stoke-on-Trent start to come to a club, to an independent club. We were getting people from Wolverhampton, a few from Manchester, even locally Leek, people making the effort to come, and it was really the back end of the mod era as well. So you'd still got that sort of tonic trousers, Ben Sherman thing going on the dance floor, but then the all-nighters, the whole thing became a different element.
Northern Soul, of course, could have a show all of its own, and it does on Radio Stoke Saturday nights with Richard Serling. So, reluctantly, we'll move on. 2. The Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, The Who, The Clash, The Specials, Motorhead, David Bowie, Queen, The Undertones and all the live music the area has hosted. Oh, now I'm getting upset. Bring back the music! And well done the Stage Door, the Sugar Mill and the Underground for keeping it live. 50 years. So many artists and bands, all a bus ride away. Oh, and one from 1964 that Pete Conway remembered on air.
The Beatles. What can you say that already hasn't been said? Well, I'll tell you something. I saw them at Stoke's Town Hall in the early 60s. They'd only had one hit record by then, and I think they were on with Jerry Marsden, Jerry and the Pacemakers. And I remember being in the town hall, and people weren't dancing. They were standing in front of the stage and watching them play. And I'd never seen that before because the girls and boys were too busy and dancing and being on the pole, I suppose. That's what they did in those days, wasn't it?
Do you know what, Pete? I think they still do. The bands didn't just turn up. There was a thriving local scene of promoters and record shops like Blood Lloyd. And Mike Lloyd reminisced about swimming baths, of all things.
In the winters of the 60s, councils closed swimming baths about at the end of September, and they took the water out and put a wooden structure in and a dance floor over the top of it. This was regular. And in 64, we booked a band, and we booked it about 6 months before, who we didn't really know, but, you know, so these are going to be big. And they were the Rolling Stones.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste.
I think it was 5 shillings to go in, if I remember rightly. And Terry and I used to split it between us, and on that night he was doing the sort of backstage end, and I was taking the money at the door. That was it, you know. It was all pay on the door. And these people started coming. I'm taking these 5 bobs. I'm taking these. And Terry came down after about an hour and said, "Don't let anybody else in. We can't move." And it was absolutely shocker in there. You couldn't move at all. And it was the Stones, and there was hundreds of people outside, you know. And they were lovely. They came on, they did the gig, went away, happy as Larry. Oh, it's happened on a lot of occasions. You always pray for those, of course, because you clean up, because whatever deal they've come in on is what they got.
With the gradual realisation that there was a whole counterculture going on about 100 yards away, Peter Legg braved the walk from Cheapside to the Vicky Hall for a lesson in live music.
And to bring us right up to date, this is apparently what happens on Saturday nights in the 70s.
There's normally 2 groups on the bill. You have the support band, and normally everybody sits down through them to save their energies for the good band work. In the interval, it's back to the old, you know, sort of sitting down and shouting and that, throwing paper aeroplanes everywhere. Then the lights dim, and there's normally some sort of announcement. The band comes on, everybody applauds and shouts and everything. Then they normally break into the first tune straight away, and immediately that happens, everybody congregates in the middle gangway. This is a Victoria, and they all walk down to the front in a big mass, and there's all men at the front saying "Go back, go back." You know, nobody takes it in. It's like they all go there, and then the men give up. Like, then everybody starts, you know, just going crazy, freaking out and doing what the hell you like.
As I say, in music, tastes are always changing, and each generation likes to splinter off and express themselves in different ways. People who had driven their parents mad with heavy metal, disco or punk were ultimately bombarded with a new sound by their own children. By the late 80s, the station was down with the kids. Well, sort of.
Hello, Mark here, and whilst Pete and Dom go out for their drink of hot Ovaltine, turn on to the latest dance sensation, Acid House. Now, you heard Dizzy D earlier on in the programme telling us about Acid House, but there's one night a week when it's Acid House all the way.
What time is it?
10 o'clock in the evening to 3 o'clock in the morning, every Tuesday downstairs at the Excalibur Club in Hanley. Now, you'd not believe it, there's so much Scotch mist there that the punters are just shadowy figures in the light show. The fluorescents are catching all the psychedelic wall hangings, and the people are dressed wicked in bandanas, floral waistcoats, and you name it. It's frenzied stuff, and Pete and Jem are the night's organisers.
The acid comes from American slang, meaning acid burn, which is stealing parts of other people's music.
Well, the rumour is it's all got to do with the psychedelic acid era, that everybody is getting high on LSD and preaching love and best wishes, man. Is that happening?
You read too many papers.
Can
you describe some of the accessories? I mean, downstairs there was a fella who seemed to have a light glowing from his mouth.
The accessories are the essentials being anything bright. The smiley emblem obviously is part of the be happy sort of thing. And basically anything that doesn't restrict the dancing, so a baggy t-shirt, baggy jeans and a pair of plimsolls.
The presenters may have been unconvinced in those early days, but the punters at the Excalibur Club weren't.
And I think everybody's pretending that they're very drugged up, but apart from that, it's a really good time. I think it's just different. There's nothing like it in Stoke at the moment.
How long do you stay here?
Till the end.
Yeah. And how late do you stay here?
Till about 2 o'clock. That's just about the most you can stand, actually.
Shelley's in Longton drew people from far and wide to listen to the likes of Sasha, who made his reputation there. Eventually, it was closed on police advice, but it had burned brightly and fiercely for a short while and was missed.
Oh, miss it, yeah. Because all the raves is going out to Stoke, like.
How good a club was it?
Brilliant. Atmosphere was good. Yeah. Brilliant atmosphere. It got packed every week. It was amazing.
So what would you do now? Where would you go for a rave?
There's nowhere really. There's only Shelley's that was good. That's where it first began. Yeah.
Place, that's where it first began.
Yeah. That's where I first went anyway. Open Shelley's. Keeps us off the streets.
Keep Shelley's open.
If they don't open Shelley's again, all the people that do come down and take drugs just go and be dotting around the streets and make more trouble for the police.
A gear change now, but staying with music. Freddie Jones explains the city's musical heritage and describes the concerts that graced the Victoria Hall long before Def Leppard and X-Ray Specs.
Built in 1887 and opened in 1888, the Victoria Hall is renowned for its acoustic properties. Since opening, the hall has entertained generations of people of the Potteries with a wide range of musical delights. Within 10 years of its construction, the hall was graced with the first performance of Elgar's King Olaf, which Elgar conducted himself. Subsequently, he became a regular visitor to the area. Arnold Bennett himself, a great lover of music houses, remarked, after listening to a performance of songsters in Hanley,
"There were 20 of them standing in a sort of flattened semicircle, the women in white and the men in scarlet hunting coats, with the conductor in knee breeches and silk stockings. Ordinary northern men and women, you could tell that, but they had class, they could really sing, they had voices, they brought the house down every time. It was the folk themselves giving something back to the folk in artistic form."
The Victoria Hall now forms one of the central venues for the city's cultural quarter.
In the 50 years before 1968, the great obsession had been sitting down in darkened rooms all over the city. Ernest Beard, the station's film reviewer of the 70s, talks us through it.
There were 40 cinemas in the area at this time, and of course the ones in Hanley, everyone will remember the Gaumont, the Empire, the Odeon, the Palace, the Capitol, and the Old Roxy, which was in Glass Street. But I'd like to mention a few that a lot of people won't either realise that they ever existed or will have forgotten their existence. At Trent Vale there was one, for instance, called the Cosy, Kozy. At Woolstanton there was one with the delightful name of the Marshlands. At Audley there was the Palace at Audley. In Burslem there was the Palladium, and one previous to that called, I think it was called the Criterion in Moorland Road, but I think that had gone by 1952. There was even one, a very nice little cinema at Abbey Hilton, which I think is now a bingo hall. There was the Prince's in Stoke. That was a very poor affair. It was known locally as the Bug Hut. The Prince's was. I think I only visited about twice, but I would agree with that description. But of course, I think the most famous one of the lot, of course, was the Victoria at Hartshill, which is now, of course, the famous theatre in the Round.
So popular was going to the pictures that the cinemas were packed show after show, with inevitable consequences.
I always remember that cinemas seemed to have a strange smell when I was a boy. It fascinated me because I never knew what this smell was, and I thought this was a smell that was applicable only to the cinema. And I expected it. And of course, I learned out later on in life, of course, it was probably BO. And of course what used to happen in a lot of cinemas was, during the interval, sometimes the newsreel, the commissioner would come round with a spray, over everybody to make them smell sweet.
So, very different from the pristine multiplexes of today. I'll let you make your own mind up on that. There will always be some who are suspicious of pleasure-seeking and warn against its corroding effect. This listener could take no more of the sheer wickedness out there.
Right, let's go then for your first house. Full house only for £10. All the ones 11. 5 a day. Full houses only.
To my mind, it's acting like a drug. You get wives coming uptown to shop. They go into a bingo hall. They stay there. They empty the purse. And the goods that come forward aren't bought. And then I suppose they ask the old fella for more wages, and then of course he starts and gets onto the boss, he can't live. Quite frankly, I would expect married people and older people thought they would have got their priorities right.
Would you ban bingo halls altogether if you had it away?
I may not go that far to say I'd ban them. As far as I'm concerned, they're already banned, because I'm not interested in them.
Anyway, that was the bloke that founded Shelley's. No, not really. Stoke, it seemed, could provide everything a man or woman might need. But for really letting your hair down, there was always holidays. As the BBC moved to Stoke, the people of the city began to take their first tentative steps into foreign travel. It suited some more than others, many of whom could see no reason to try somewhere new.
Grandma Pigott is like a spring chicken. What's Thinker says? We've won this holiday. I'm going to ask him if he'll take me to the Isle of Capri. That's where your Gracie Fields used to live, and it's ever so romantic. It says we can have a week there and watch the sun go down over the Mediterranean. Then it says I'd like to go Eastbourne. Me and our Kitty used to go Eastbourne before Arthur died. And we used to have ice creams on front and watch the dancing troupe on the pier. It was lovely, it was. I do hope he'll take me, she says. Then, she says, I'd like to go Florence and see all the architecture and the pictures and the tapestries. I've never been anywhere but Blackpool with him. But our Grandad Pigott had got other ideas of where I was going to spend this holiday, and it's certainly one of the romantic Isle of Capri.
The old favourites endured. People, not all people of course, wanted a home from home. During Potter's Fortnight, when we had Potter's Fortnight, much of the city decamped to traditional havens, Blackpool of course, but most particularly the North Wales towns of Llandudno and Rhyl, which for the last week of June and the first week of July became known as Stoke-on-Sea. It even had its own Westlands in the form of Anglesey. What people wanted, in the most part, was what they had at home, plus sea. And what they couldn't get there, they took with them, or ordered in.
Several hotels come to me from Blackpool.
Good heavens. What's that? Oh, ex-North Staffordshire folks who are out there?
Yes, people got a boarding house in Blackpool. Rhyl, this week they've gone down to Lincoln.
Good heavens.
Torquay. I think the wife sent some to South Wales. But they're ex-pottery people,
yes,
you know, and they still take them, they still come here. And if people off Silverdale, or Nutton, all round here, they take them back when they go on their holidays. Else they can't have their holiday if they don't take their oatcakes, that's it.
As time moved on, the oatcakes and the people branched out to the sunshine of Europe, although the traditional resorts were still favourite.
We come all this way to Blackpool, it's like an hour and a half, and then you meet people you know.
Yeah.
Well, I don't actually know you, but I know you're listening. Yeah. Go on, what's your name?
Val.
Val from?
Alsager.
Alsager. Hey!
I hope my grandchildren listen, because they call me Grandma Duck.
Do they call you Grandma Duck? Why do they do that? Because, like, you say duck
all the time.
Oh, duck, I say duck, aye. What are you doing in Blackpool?
We come there for 2 weeks.
You're here till, what, the weekend and then going back on Monday, or?
I'll go back tomorrow.
Have you?
Because he's got to go work. But we're here again in 2 weeks.
All it seemed that the good people of Stoke-on-Trent needed, and have ever needed, was somewhere to drink, somewhere to dance, somewhere to enjoy with their friends and have a laugh. Somewhere like Stoke.
It's very nice to go travelling.